Hi, everyone. This week we are going to talk about Macbeth. Oops. All right, so let's talk about William Shakespeare first. We talked about him a little bit last week, but just kind of a review here. He's born in 1564, 2 months after Christopher Marlowe. He lives until 1616, so he's outliving Marlowe a little bit. His dad was successful in business and politics. I think he was an alderman, but he ended up having a downfall, probably because he was Catholic. And one thing that's interesting about Shakespeare is, unlike a lot of the people that we've read about in class, he doesn't have a university background as far as we can tell. Seems like most of his what he's learned about the theater and what we can read in his work is coming from him performing in theater troupes. Um, all right. We know he went to grammar school, we think. We know which one he went to. When he was 18, he got married to Anne Hathaway. They had two daughters and a son, Hamnet, who died at 11 years old. Um, Again, we don't know a whole lot about all of this stuff, but we do know his second daughter, his, I guess, middle child, I think married, had like a very unhappy marriage that ended in pretty severe shame. And Shakespeare died almost immediately after that. So there's some, there's some mystery around that. Yeah, I think it came out that the man that she had married had a woman had died giving birth to his baby, and both she and the baby died in childbirth. And so it was like a huge scandal because it ended up coming out. And I think it was like right after his daughter got married to this guy. And so it ended up casting shame on his family. Um, all right. And we have a lot of drama and mystery surrounding him. There's a period of his life where we don't know where he was, his lost years, and there's some speculation it had something to do with um, poaching violations, and he maybe had to flee the area. He has a cryptic will where he leaves his second best bed to his wife, Anne, and it's just kind of a weird thing to say. And so sometimes people speculate that that meant something like really bad. That's all I think, as far as I know, that's what he left her, and he left the rest of his stuff to his kids. So it's kind of weird. There's a lot of mystery here. And for us, as much as he's famous and people are trying to learn everything about him, it's crazy how much we don't know. Okay, the Elizabethan theater was huge at this time period, right? And so, we read a play last week, we were reading another one this week, and that's because yeah, plays were really big. They were drawing in 2,000 people to watch these plays. And so we're gonna get to this in a minute, but it was kind of like a big rowdy affair. So we have before kind of the kind of theater that we tend to think of, like the Globe. That was in 1599 when the Globe was built. I'm going to get to that at the very end. So before that, we had traveling troupes of actors, and what they would do is they would just kind of like, or playing companies, they would go and get noble patronage. And so they had to find someone to sponsor them, essentially, kind of pay for them to exist. And otherwise they would be get in trouble for vagrancy, for, like, not having a home and doing regular work. And so they had to have noble patronage. And another thing to kind of keep in mind about these theater troupes is that instead of like doing auditions and casting people from outside the group, they would just take on the roles themselves. Okay, so if you join a theater troupe, then you know that eventually you're going to play so and so or whatever. And I'm sure there were different types of actors who were more suitable to different roles. And so yeah, so you would just take on that kind of role. Some popular genres at the time for plays would be morality plays, which are essentially like sermons, history plays, where they're going over some sort of like dramatic event in history, like war, conspiracy, things like that. Revenge tragedies. This is going to be kind of like Hamlet is a revenge tragedy, where you have it's a revenge as a major plot point, and tragedy, of course, it means it ends in a sad way. And then comedies were also a popular genre at the time. Shakespeare wrote a lot of comedies. If you haven't read any of his comedies, I would really recommend them. I mean, I do think that I probably prefer them to his tragedies. Um, but anyway, but his tragedies just do have a little bit more influence, I think. All right. Um, so 1590, Marlowe ends up kind of perfecting iambic pentameter. And so when that happened, basically, and I think, we talked about this last week. If you read Shakespeare's sonnets and you read Sidney's sonnets, they're just like a little bit clunky. They don't just flow as well. With Shakespeare's sonnets, there's just such a nice meter to them, and that is what ends up changing theater dramatically because it really is just sounds better. So that is going to affect the meter of plays in a huge way, where a lot of plays are going to pick up that iambic pentameter and run with it. Um, so like I said, 1599, the Globe Theater opened, and these playhouses would typically seat 2,000. So eventually we kind of have playhouses being built in cities, um, and that would and towns. So that would allow people to kind of have a stable place where they can go to the theater. And then I don't know if any of you have been to one of these theaters. I went to the Globe in London like almost 10 years ago now, but it's open air seating. So there's like no roof. And then most everybody stands in the middle in front of the stage. It's like an oval shaped building. They stand in the middle. And then, and I think maybe there's some sort of thing you can buy now where you can it's like a standing chair kind of a situation. So you have a little support. But then if you pay more, then you can sit up in the stands. And so there's like a few tiers that have like bleacher set up basically. And so that's where I sat because the person I went with had some pretty serious issues. And so we needed to sit for a long play. But yeah, it's really interesting. And so back then, where we were sitting would have been reserved for wealthier people. Most people, could, you know, uh, there was enough room that people who were even of lower wealth were able to stand. Okay, so theater haters. This is my, I guess, clickbaity kind of a slide title here. Basically, theater did attract hostility from people at the time. Particularly like religious leaders didn't really like theater because they saw it as corrupting. And, this is speculation, but there was a sense that they were competing with the morality plays that, that religious, churches and stuff were putting on, right? Okay, some other things. Theater was the target of blame for spreading illnesses like the bubonic plague. So that's, yeah. You get that many people crammed together, it makes sense that that would happen. And I guess people would like stuff herbs and stuff up their noses to try to protect them. But yeah. The other thing is that the theater is going to attract huge, noisy crowds. And, there was just a lot of traffic and things like that. And so apparently it was kind of a hassle for locals. And so if you live near any kind of arena or anything like that, you know what I'm talking about. It can be annoying. And then also it supposedly attracted crime, ranging from sex work to pickpocketing. And so there was just kind of this sense that like it was a dangerous place to be because you might get sick or you might get pickpocketed or you might get corrupted by the last thing I'm going to say, which is says this is a quote from Norton. Moralists warned that theaters were nests of sedition and claimed that the practice of having boys play female roles excited illicit sexual desires, both heterosexual and homosexual. And so there was just kind of this sense that there was all kinds of immoral and dangerous stuff going on there. All right, so let's talk about Macbeth specifically, though. And I guess let's just go ahead and start with the plot itself. Macbeth is a tragedy, and it tells the story of a man who, at the very beginning of the play, he's told by witches that he will become the king. And then they kind of turn to his friend and they're like, and your sons will be kings. So when Macbeth gets home, well, I guess he like writes a letter. When he gets home, he talks to his wife, and they're both like, "Well, the witches said that I was going to be king, and Duncan, the king, current king, just happens to be coming to the house to stay with us tonight." And so they plot to murder Duncan so that they can, get this power. And and you might have noticed in Act One, because that's the part that we read, right? Act One, she's like, "Screw your courage to this sticking place." She's telling him like, you know, this is your responsibility, and you need to do it, and you need to be brave, and that's that. And so you can definitely see that she's less wavering than Macbeth. And okay, Act Two, Macbeth kills Duncan, and then he kills the guards in kind of a way where it's like it wasn't planned. Um, and then Duncan's sons flee the country because, he didn't make it look like an accident or like a natural death or something. It's clear that the king has been murdered. Um, and at this point, Banquo already suspects Macbeth. He's already pretty sure that Macbeth did this. Act three, Macbeth picks up that Banquo's suspicious of him. He kills him. And then Banquo's ghost comes and haunts Macbeth. At this point, Macduff, who is the foil to Macbeth, he's kind of like who Macbeth could have been if he wasn't so evil. He goes to England to find allies against Macbeth. And then Act Four, this is where Macbeth asks the witches to give him a little bit more. Can you give me a little more prophecy, basically? Um, and they warn him of Macbeth, but then they also tell him that what is it? No one born of a woman can kill him. And so so Macbeth is like, oh, great, no worries then. But just to be safe, he goes ahead and kills Macduff's family, including his wife and kids. Okay. And then Act Five, which is obviously like such a dark scene. This is a very, very dark play. And some of the people I've been reading have been calling this his darkest tragedy, Shakespeare's. Act Five, Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking. She seems to have gone mad with the guilt of murder. Even though she seemed like she was the most resolute in the first place, now she seems to be struggling the most with the decision. And then Macduff murders Macbeth oops, he doesn't become king. Malcolm becomes the king. All right. Okay. So, like I said, Macbeth is a tragedy, and this is a very popular genre at the time. Um, but what I'll say about tragedy, so we assume Shakespeare is influenced by Aristotle and the way that Aristotle talks about tragedies. Having said that, everything about that is kind of speculation because again, we don't know a lot about Shakespeare's education, but he seems influenced, okay? So if we look at the definition of a tragic hero so the protagonist of a tragedy, the tragic hero must be neither a villain nor a virtuous man, but a character between these two extremes, a man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or frailty. Okay, and this word is hamartia that they're using to talk about this. And so, if we think about Macbeth, for example, Macbeth is very ambitious, and then he's very encouraged in that ambition by these witches who tell him he's going to be king. And then, almost immediately after they tell him he's going to be king, um, they had also told him he's going to be the Thane of Cawdor, and then he's like, "What are you talking about? I'm not the Thane of Cawdor." And then he finds out he is because the Thane of Cawdor just got in trouble for some sort of thing, betrayal. And so anyway, so he's encouraged by these outside forces, and this is something that is going to be from kind of a Greek tragedy where you have your mistake that you have made or some sort of tragic flaw in yourself. Um, And that is kind of combining with the external forces in the world that are like sort of encouraging that motion, right? And so, yeah, if you want to learn more about Hamartia, by the way, I got links here and here, Britannica, and this is literarydevices.net, which I was skeptical of that title, but of that name of a website, but it's actually has some interesting source material. Okay. So one thing I would point out is interesting about Shakespeare, and that I think we could probably say in general about the tragedies, because this is making me think back to Marlowe last week talking about Dr. Faustus as the first Christian tragedy, right? And so it says here, this quote says, Aristotle says that a tragic destiny is precipitated by the hero's tragic fault, his error or frailty. But Aristotle also calls this turn of events a change of fortune. Shakespeare's Cassius and Julius Caesar says, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. And so it does seem like Shakespeare is much more kind of in the way that we've talked about with Marlowe, focused on this internal conflict and the way that um, a person is responsible for like the consequences that they experience rather than this idea of fate. There is this idea that you are an agent in your own story, right? All right. So if we think about the form in Macbeth, and I wanted to keep it simple this week, we could really talk a lot about form, but one of the things that we could talk about is the fact that this is in 5 acts, and that's going to be a very, very common thing that we're going to see in drama, and with Shakespeare. So Shakespeare probably didn't actually split his plays up this way. But when they end up being printed, right, and collected, then they're broken up into acts. And so that's kind of interesting to me. If you want to read more about that, you absolutely can. There's a link there. But the way that we have divided these plays up into acts is based on Freytag's pyramid, which is you might have seen if you write fiction or you read fiction, you've probably learned about this, but we have, and I have found the blurriest picture on the internet to show you. Exposition, it starts with, and then it gets into rising action, climax, which is kind of like, the absolute peak of action, and then we have falling action as things start to move towards a resolution, and then catastrophe at the end of our tragedy. Um, because we do not have a happy ending, right? Nobody's getting married. Um, it's gonna be sad. So another thing in terms of the form of this one is it's blank verse. So again, we have unrhymed iambic pentameter. It's that thing I'm talking about again with the meter. If you want to refresh your memory on iambic pentameter, there's a link here. A couple of things to note, and when we're looking at Macbeth, is that there's going to be something called half lines and shared lines, which means that because there is a lot of dialogue in the play, there's going to be moments when like even though the verse meter is staying the same, they're gonna like jump. They're gonna give one person maybe 3 syllables, and then they're gonna jump to somebody else who gets a few syllables, and then so they might actually split up those 10, the 10 syllables between a few speakers, right? And so you might have noticed that while you're reading, where it's like you can still kind of hear the meter or sense the meter in the words, but it's not going to just be line, 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 right? It's not going to be like just perfectly lined up. It's going to potentially jump around to different speakers. Okay. So another thing that we could talk about is this idea of trochaic tetrameter. And basically what this is that if you noticed, the witches have a little bit shorter of lines in the play. And this is kind of to give a little bit of a kind of like an otherworldliness to them, we think. That's how it seems to affect the play, right? Is that, by the pricking of my thumb. And so it's something wicked this way comes instead of, so that's a pentameter. In other words, there's 8 syllables instead of 10 in the pentameter. All right. And then there's another type of writing in Macbeth, which is prose, which what? And we saw this with Dr. Faustus last week too. This is going to be used for scenes where Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking. And so the idea here is that maybe she's like, she's usually speaking in verse, but now she has sort of lost her sense of direction, and maybe even her mind. And so she's speaking in prose. And we see it with lower status characters like murderers and the porter. And so I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing too, to look at the different, it's not all written in blank verse, even though it is primarily. My face is in the way, but basically what this one says is that one of the things that people might refer to this play as is the Scottish play, and that is going to be based in the superstition around Macbeth because of, well, there's a history of incidents like supposedly somebody accidentally stabbed someone to death for real, because the prop knife was replaced with a real knife. Or there's all these stories of terrible things happening, including deaths, and is associated with Macbeth. And so, anyway, where is this all coming from, though? It seems like part of it might be coming from a really deep connection to demonology and, witchcraft. James the First. So, Elizabeth the First, we're basically studying up to the end of her reign. Um, After she dies, she doesn't have any heirs. Remember, she didn't want to marry, she didn't want to have heirs, and so she dies, and they give the crown to King James the Fourth or something. I can't remember what number he was of Scotland, and he becomes James the First of England. So basically, he had married Anne of Denmark, and when they were traveling back to Scotland together, they're on a boat, and there's these terrible storms that are, threatening to wreck the boat, and they're afraid for their lives. And James is like, "Oh, well, this is obviously witchcraft by people who like, don't approve of my reign, or don't like my choice of wife or whatever, right?" So he has this idea that there's people witches scheming against him, who've cast spells to cause these storms. And then eventually he would hunt these witches down, torture them, and interrogate them to try to find out how they did it. And there's a whole backstory about this that's really fascinating if you want to learn more about it. Um, Anyway, and so then James writes Demonology in 1597, which classifies types of demons in witchcraft and encourages people to hunt witches, right? To identify them and hunt them. So if we think about Dr. Faustus and Macbeth, both of these are good examples of dramatic attempts to sort of like make something that King James the First would like, right? Because they know he has this sort of obsession with witchcraft and demons and evil. And so Shakespeare actually studied the demonology and included real incantation. So witches, supposedly real life witches, cursed the play because they're like offended that he's using these real incantations in their play. And then some people say that the incantations themselves are what curses the play, that Shakespeare wrote into the play, and it's not a response from witches, but it's actually the lines themselves. So there's all this kind of theory and superstition surrounding it. Okay. Some famous quotes. We have "Screw your courage to the sticking place," which I think I already said. "What's done is done." "Double, double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble." "By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes." "One fell swoop." "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow." "Out, out, brief candle." So there's so many of these kind of long monologues and soliloquies and things like that that are really crucial to the play. This is from the first scene, or I mean, the first act. So this we read. I have links to all of these if you want to get a little bit of context for where these quotes appear in the play. This is a good one, and this is a good one at the end. This is probably the most famous speech in Macbeth, is "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow," and it's when he finds out that Lady Macbeth has died. And so anyway, I wanted to include it. So if you want, you can watch this soliloquy from Macbeth with Denzel Washington. It's amazing. I love that movie. Okay. So I wanted to include some other adaptations in here. I haven't watched all of these or read them, but we have Macbeth from 2015 that has Michael Fassbender, I believe, in it, and Marion Cotillard. And Tragedy Macbeth is Frances McDormand and Denzel Washington. That one I've watched and it's great. And then I just have a bunch of others in here that I think are interesting that I haven't watched or read. Most of these are movies. And then I tried to find free screening, like, like free streaming for all of these. So if you really wanted to do a deep dive and watch all of these, I think you could, most of them for free. And then the only one that you can't watch is this one, Voodoo Macbeth, which I thought was kind of interesting. Is an Orson Welles production that I think is so it's from 1937. So it's a Harlem Theater production of Macbeth. It looks fascinating, and there's a little bit of a footage from it here. And then Macbeth from 1948 with Orson Welles. I couldn't find this streaming legally anywhere, so I included something from YouTube that I don't think is legit. But anyway, yeah. So if you're interested in looking into any of these adaptations, hopefully these would be great. And then if you want to learn more about Macbeth, I have been reading all over the internet. I still feel like I haven't covered enough. There's just so much to say about Shakespeare and Macbeth. Macbeth is his shortest tragedy. It's really a short play. There's not a whole lot of asides and side characters. It kind of starts with some side characters, but then it really gets into the heart of it again. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of one of the nicer ones to do a deep dive into because there's just less, a little bit less about it. Frankly, if we had covered Hamlet, oh my goodness, it would have taken me so much longer to cover everything, because there really is just a lot that has influenced, and it's still so resonant. But people seem to have already read it. So if you want to learn more about Macbeth, there's absolutely so much more to learn, including, I thought this was interesting, this Visit Scotland page where they talk about Macbeth and they talk about the real Macbeth, by the way, Macbeth is based on a real person named Macbeth, and some of the Scottish settings from the play, as well as just kind of other trivia and things. All right, everyone, I think that's it this week. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to talking to you next week when we will be doing our midterm.